a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing. I am John Bonus of Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
Video. Look at us, John.
Literally. At us on video.
First of all, apologies to anybody who's shocked by what we look like. This is why we've not been tempted by video to this point. But for anybody listening just on audio, like the last 15 years worth of shows, business as usual, hopefully for you.
Yes.
But for anybody interested in watching us talk and maybe seeing some bells and whistles that we throw in along the way.
I might throw in a little video, see what happens.
Don't overpromise and under-deliver on that. But we have some bigger plans that we've been working on for the last few months for the podcast going forward. And part of that is YouTube and other video, which we've decided to stick our toes in the water of today for the first time. This is a free Friday show, so we thought let's stick it on YouTube. Let's try to record video and see how it goes. So welcome to anybody who's watching on video. I apologize for how we look, but hopefully this maybe reaches a different audience and gives
that
you
isn't going to change, just FYI.
Well, here's the thing. If we make a lot of money off YouTube, I'm going to go to Turkey and have one of those like facial reconstruction and hair transplant things.
Sure.
Maybe. I mean, I'm not promising that. It depends. But yeah, if you're listening on audio, go over to YouTube and give that a try. Subscribe to the Gleeman and the Geek YouTube channel. You'll be able to find it. It's been dormant, so we're kind of launching it in a way, but it also includes the past year of free shows as a back catalog available also on YouTube, just in audio form.
Yeah,
so
fortunately for all of you, those are video free. You can watch them as a video, but you just see the little wavy things going. You don't actually have to look at us. Right.
So today we're launching this as a video component. And I know I personally watch several podcasts on YouTube in addition to some that I just listened to. So we wanted to enter the 2020s and make that available to people if they're interested in it. And also we're hoping that once we get a little more comfortable with this, because you're going to have to bear with us on this one. Because John's behind the controls and he's going to be adding some components that we're not entirely certain, but hopefully you just, by the way, if you're on audio only, you missed our brand new video intro with all kinds of old pictures of us and stuff like that. So that's reason alone to just go check out the YouTube. But anyway,
and that is the biggest reason is we got a really cool intro video. So go check that out. And that's clearly the best part so far, or probably the best part of the hour plus you're going to be seeing of the videos.
There you go. Now we're under promising.
Yes, that's right.
I like that much better. Less pressure.
That's right.
So we got a lot of stuff to talk about, but yeah, we wanted to get that out of the way. Go like and subscribe, as the kids say on YouTube. We're gonna have to learn all the YouTube phrasing where it's like, hammer that like button. I've heard people say that a lot. I don't know if I'm comfortable. We're too old for that. But so yeah, go to YouTube, sign up, or just keep listening on audio. That's not going to change, and we're hopeful that the audio quality remains the same, but we're not entirely certain of that. Right, so this is a little bit of a test show. All right, with that out of the way, hi John, you're looking handsome. I've never really looked at you before this. It's really
that's because I'm usually shading my face behind a big baseball cap.
Well, one thing I was going to say, now that we're on video, I'm going to lie a lot more. So you look great, and I look okay, and all that. We thankfully the Twins snapped a 6-game losing streak and avoided a winless road trip with a definitive victory in Cincinnati to end what was a pretty ugly all-around road trip with some dumb losses, some blowout losses, some bad play. But the bats came alive, thankfully, Thursday.
Well, and the wind was definitely blowing out at Cincinnati. They were talking about that on the podcast or on the broadcast of the Reds broadcast about anything that's in the air is going long. So it was fortunate for the Twins.
They go 1-5 instead of 0-6 on the road trip, which feels oddly significantly better, even though it's not really. But they get swept in Houston. They narrowly avoid the sweep in Cincinnati. That now brings them back home. They play starting tonight. We're recording this Friday morning. Starting tonight, 3-game set. Can be real hot and real crowded at Target Field against the Milwaukee Brewers. The Wisconsinite who lives in my home will be there, apparently, possibly with your wife.
I think that is the plan tonight. Correct.
So we'll see. And then they have 4 against the Mariners, who they just played not too long ago, which is should be interesting. So a full homestand coming up, and they will enter it 37-37 is the record. It seems like a lot of work just to get back to 574 games into the season.
We did a little test video yesterday just to kind of F around with this technology a little bit, and we ended up having about a 10-minute discussion about, what is this team? And I love that we've gotten to the point where, given the fact that they started so slow and then they were so hot in the middle and then they kind of plugged along and then we're on it. Yesterday, we're in the middle of a 6-game losing streak that we end up getting to this point of the season and we're like, they're a 500 team, which is often a way of saying, I don't really know who this team is, which is pretty much the case like right now. Like, all the narratives that we've had up to this point have kind of melted away, right? We thought, oh, this is going to be a really good pitching team, but a really poor hitting team. Well, we don't have as much confidence in the pitching. I don't know that we have any more confidence in the hitting than we did, but so many, not just on a team level do we have questions. I think we got questions on an individual level about so many of the really good players. Is Buxton this good? Is, I think, a legitimate question. I think, is Correa good, the same, is a legitimate question. I think we're going to be covering some of those questions during the podcast today.
Yeah, well, and it also, I don't know, it doesn't help, or it does help, that a lot of the narratives are carrying over from the last 2 months of last season, where I didn't know what to make of this team then. I don't know what to make of this team now. And the other thing is, it's a lot like last season, some of the same, kind of ebbs and flows of the season, because last year you had the bad start, then you had the 12-game winning streak. This year you have the bad start with the 13-game winning streak. The thing that I come back to on this year's team, and I'm sure I'll be accused of this being a pessimistic view, but we'll see, I guess. But yeah, well, no, video, that's not going to change that. I'll still be...
Okay, all right.
But they were 13-20 before the 13-game winning streak began, which is a .394 winning percentage, which is really bad. Since the 13-game winning streak ended, they are 11-17, which is a .393 winning percentage. So essentially identical, horrible records before and after the winning streak. And I'm not saying the winning streak didn't matter.
Sandwiching a 1,000%.
Right.
Winning streak. Yeah, that's
when you sit there and you say, this team, we don't know what to make of it, how would you know what to make of a team that's like this?
And I think you make a good point, which is that that is a narrative, that the questioning about what this team was is a thing that goes back certainly to the offseason. We went into this season not knowing what this team was, right? Like, the big question going into this season was, hold on, were they the team they were for the first 4.5 months of the season, or were they the team they were for the last month and a half of the season? So we had that question throughout the offseason, and truly, as you pointed out, we spent the last month and a half of last season wondering who this team is, because we kept going, this can't be this bad after being this good for the first 4.5 months. But the one thing we know about this team is that they never seem to be sort of in the middle.
Right.
They seem to be really hot or really cold all the time.
Which is a very odd thing to say about a team that went 82-80 last year and is now 37-37 this year.
And frankly, a team that is coached by Rocco Baldelli, which is, a manager who, I think the narrative coming into midway through last year was, he's a very even-keeled guy. The team stays very even-keeled. He preaches sort of an even-keel approach. We're going to take this one day at a time, et cetera. And how can that, philosophy and coaching and I mean, I think even that if you go up a level to management, sort of a long-term view of things, and we're getting caught in the short-term roller coaster ride of a season.
Well, I mean, I think it speaks a little to maybe the limitations of what a manager can control.
Well, I agree.
Which is, he might be the most even-keeled person of all time, and he might attempt to replicate that in his clubhouse. But if your best starting pitcher's hurt and your 4 of your 6 best hitters don't hit, you can be as even-keeled as you want, brother. But the players still have to play, which I think is probably our 15-year-long overall view of managers, which is not unimportant. But the players have to play. That was almost a Taylor Swift lyric quote. So welcome to all the Swifties.
I was going to say, that's the
joining
new
us on
thing we're going to be
YouTube.
putting on video. Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot more Taylor Swift videos. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Hey, John, play that Taylor Swift clip, buddy. No, we don't want that copyright lawsuit.
No.
So yeah, they're 37-30. I mean, the nice thing is both within the division and the AL wildcard race, you're never out of it. I mean, unless you're
Right.
legitimately bad, you're not out of it. 500, you're still in it. That's going to be true a month from now too. I mean, that's just the way this thing's designed, and also the rest of the Central. Well, the Twins have played poorly over the last 3 weeks. So has the rest of the Central for the most part. The Royals have kind of fallen apart a little bit. Cleveland's just barely above 500. I think they're
They're
gamer.
1 game of 5. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, everyone's kind of come back into the muck a little bit, which I'm not saying that's a positive thing. I'm just saying for the next
Right.
X number of games, what do we got left? 88 games. You can still
There's a lot to be
move
decided.
forward.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
You just have
Yep.
to play differently than you have before and after the streak. I mean, this would be a good test. The Brewers are always a solid team. We've seen that. Those series are always fun, especially.
Yeah,
at
they're like
Target
5
Field.
games over 500.
Yeah, I mean, they've been consistently better than the Twins, I would say, over the last
Right.
6 or 8 years or whatever. And then the Mariners we've seen too are capable. They're a little bit maybe Twins-like in that over the last 2 or 3 years, certainly last year and the year before, some very good stretches. They've held on to first in that division for a while, including earlier this year, but also some very, very poor stretches that kind of ultimately lead to a 500-ish result, which I guess the Twins can be grouped into that too. The one thing I want to talk about right away before we get into, I don't know, what'll probably be not the most pleasant discussion given how they've played, is a very pleasant topic, which is Byron Buxton. And Byron Buxton has now returned from 2 injuries fairly quickly. As John now, look at that video. I'm watching a Byron Buxton home run. Can you believe that?
You're going to see a few of them because
Yeah.
he's been hitting up a ton of them.
That's true. Should we show all his home runs? That'll be the rest of the show.
I could do that. Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah, so to anybody just listening on audio, you're missing watching Byron Buxton round third base at this very moment right now. So yeah, Buxton has been, was great and healthy for the first 40 or 50 games. Then he suffers the concussion in Baltimore on the collision with Carlos Correa. He misses a little bit more time than Correa. He basically misses 2 weeks. He comes back from that on absolute fire, not necessarily from a power hitting standpoint, but just great at bats, some clutch at bats, hitting 300, drawing some walks, stealing bases, and then he gets hit on the elbow earlier this week.
Right.
Comes out of that game and then misses the next game. I guess it was the end of last week. And we're like, oh boy, here we go. Did he fracture his elbow? Did he do whatever? No, he's back in the lineup very quickly on that, and has not only been on fire since then, but he's hitting for huge power. I mean, he's got 3 games in a row with a homer, including 2 on Thursday.
Right.
Back-to-back games
to leadoff homers
with a leadoff homer.
Right. Yeah.
Overall, since coming back from the concussion, which I think is 17 games he's played since coming back from the concussion, he's hitting like 340 with 18 RBIs in 17 games, handful of homers. I think he's got 4 steals. He's drawing more walks than ever. And also he's robbed a homer in Cincinnati and made a couple of really nice diving catches in the outfield. He's now 12 for 12 stealing bases this season, which really speaks to how good he's feeling, how good his legs and his knees specifically are feeling. I mean, this is just, we've talked about this before. He's certainly had stretches like this before. Almost every season he has a stretch like this. And health is always going to be the key. Health is always going to be the thing looming over everything. There's a skepticism that's baked into Byron Buxton's injury track record that just will never go away, probably ever.
And is legitimate.
Right.
I mean,
I'm not saying it's not. But the thing we always talk about, or I always try to stress to fans, is enjoy what you're watching, because I truly believe in terms of all-around impact, offensively, defensively, and on the bases, and just in terms of, this is an entertainment product.
Right. Yeah.
How fun a guy is to watch. I truly believe he's probably one of the 5 best, most talented, most impactful players in Twins history. Now, at the end of his career, is he going to be one of the 5 best players in Twins history? No, because he's not going to have the longevity and the durability and the, just the total counting stats. He's got half as many games played as a lot of guys. So that's a factor. But when Byron Buxton is at his best, which we're fortunate to have seen almost this entire year, other than
Yeah.
a 2-week break. When Byron Buxton is playing at the peak of his ability, there are just so few guys in baseball, but certainly in Twins history, that can do the things he can do, even one of the things he can do. And the fact that he can do all of it, and the fact that he's rolling to this extent right now, it's a little sad because the rest of the lineup is not doing him, not doing him any
you're
favors. Right. So I worry a little that what he's doing is getting kind of lost in the shuffle, but he's thriving at the top of that lineup. He volunteered for the leadoff spot a few weeks ago when they were struggling, or a little longer than that, maybe, when they were struggling to figure out, we don't really have a traditional leadoff guy. Baldelli said that Buxton basically came up to him and said, put me in the leadoff spot. I like doing it. And
it's interesting going back, especially for those of us who have been watching Buxton, come up through the minors and, cut his teeth with, underneath Molitor and that sort of thing, where everybody assumed he was going to be sort of the ultimate leadoff hitter for this team for years at a time. And he didn't really develop into that type of player. He developed into a slugger hidden inside of a sprinter's body, right? But, to see him now at the top of it's just been so long waiting for this. It's been such a long, frustrating wait. I don't blame people for disparaging or for giving up on seeing what they're finally seeing, or not recognizing this is what they wanted to see 10 years ago when the comps were coming up and he was the number one prospect in the minor leagues. And everybody was like, well, boy, we could really have something special here. It's been, 6, 7, 8 years of waiting for this to happen because injuries, right? A lot of injuries were happening, and it was a real frustrating period. It was a real frustrating period for him. Like we saw him at spring training, the week, not last spring training, but before the 2024 season. And you finally got a sense of how frustrating 2023 and 2022 had been for him, how much pain he had been playing through when you saw him pain-free going into the 2024 season.
Right.
And now we basically, it's a little bit dampened by the fact that he spent, 4 to 6 weeks on the IL last year with a strained hamstring. So I can't just say, listen, he's been perfectly healthy for 2 years, but he's been a different kind of healthy for these 2 years than he was ever beforehand. There has not a chronic condition that he is dealing with that he dealt with for, prior to this thing. And to see this him going just crazy and frankly getting better. Like he seems to be getting better the further away he gets from these injuries, to the point, and it's easy to say when he's on a tear like he is right now, but he is doing everything. In that Seattle series, he showed he wasn't showing as much of the power, although I think he did show a little power there, but he was also just coming up in clutch moments, getting on base, stealing bases, and the tying run or the deciding run was being he was creating it by himself on those base paths. And now we're going to be able to see him do it. Now we're seeing him do it, for a team that really, really has trouble playing from behind, for him to come out and give them the instant lead in 2 of these last 3 games has been remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you would expect someone who's further removed from a chronic knee injury that was solved by multiple surgeries,
right,
to start to look better. Yeah. I think the thing I would say, and you're seeing that with like the plate discipline, which he's showing more of that than he really has ever, which is an interesting way to get on base for a guy who's got that much speed. Right. I think it's also funny, you mentioned like Molitor tried to pigeonhole him into the leadoff spot because he was so fast, but he had a horrible on base percentage. I would say he didn't really change. Baseball's viewpoint of the leadoff spot changed. Right. Now baseball's view, baseball wide, and the number 2 spot in the lineup too. We talked about this over the years. Used to be the leadoff guy was your fastest guy. The number 2 guy was like a bunt him over type of Nick Punto, Matt Tolbert. Yeah, right. Well, now the leadoff guy can hit for power. The number 2 guy is usually your best hitter. And so it's not that Byron Buxton is so much better of an on-base threat now, although he is showing over the last few weeks signs of becoming that. He still doesn't have a great on-base percentage. It's that now the Twins and about 25 of the 29 other teams are like, we just want our best hitters at the top of the lineup. And we don't need the guy to set the table when the guy can clear his own table, basically. That's the worst thing. There's our first bad analogy on YouTube, by the way. First of many. Expect to see lots of that. So, yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing from Buxton, I mean, I can just cite you some of the numbers here. He leads all major league center fielders in OPS. He's on pace for 125 games. He leads the Twins in wins above replacement and WPA for position players. He's already been worth like way more than his $15 million salary, and that's only going to keep going. He has the third highest slugging percentage in the entire American League, behind Aaron Judge and Cal Raleigh, who are the two MVP candidates, basically.
Sure, right.
And he's only taken one game at DH. So not only has he been in the lineup, other than that 2 weeks that he missed, he's been playing center field, and he's been playing a very good center field, maybe not quite at the heights that he had when he was 25 years old, because he's 31 now, but he's certainly still a very good center fielder. Like I said, he's 12 for 12 stealing bases, and he's gotten increasingly aggressive in those spots. Once, I think he's getting comfortable that his knee actually feels okay. So, I mean, first of all, he's going to be an easy all-star pick in 3 weeks, whenever they do that.
The question really is, can we get him into the starting lineup?
No, there's no chance of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a popular. People always go, that's just a popularity. Yeah, it's a literal popularity.
Exactly what it is. Yeah, that's
okay,
exactly
fine.
what it is. Right, yeah.
But it doesn't really matter. As long if you're an all-star, you're an all-star. It says the same thing on your baseball reference page. And the fun part about this one, if he's able to stay healthy for the next several weeks and make the all-star team, which if he's at all healthy, he will be a shoo-in for it. Because I mean, he's been I would argue that he's been the best center fielder in the American League, certainly. It's in Georgia. It's in Atlanta.
Oh, that's right.
He's from
cool.
Baxley, Georgia,
right.
And still got a whole bunch of family there.
He was on a tear versus when they played the Braves in Atlanta. That series that was fun to watch too. Yeah.
So that would be very fun as just a side plot. I would like to see him be an all-star. And you were talking earlier how, and I agree that people have been waiting 6 or 7 years for this. But the interesting thing about that is it's all been injury driven. It's not been really performance driven.
Right.
Because the only season he had over the last, let's say, 6 years that wasn't really good when he played was 2023, when his knee was so bad that he literally didn't step foot in the outfield. He was a designated hitter only. And even then, his offensive performance was super streaky and not very good overall. And he got shut down in August and had another knee surgery that ultimately led to him feeling healthy. They removed the plica, which is like a little flap from his knee. And that was the thing that did it. That was the eureka moment. Like, oh my God, my knee's been killing me for X number of years. Now this is fixed. But if you go back and look at his, per game performance or even just overall performance, I'm going to go back to 2019. Okay. That's the Bomba Squad year. He had a 115 OPS plus in 2019. He was certainly the team MVP until he ran into the outfield wall in Miami and then ended up missing the bulk of the second half. But even that year, he slugged .513 with a 115 OPS plus, which means he was 15% better than a league average player, and that's really good for a center fielder. 2020, which was the COVID shortened year, he played 39 out of 60 games in that year, had a 125 OPS plus. 2021, which is as good as I've ever seen him over like a prolonged period, but he only played 61 games. A 171 OPS plus. He had a 1,000 OPS. He batted .300. He had 19 homers and 23 doubles in 61 games. Racked up 5 wins above replacement in less than half of a season. I mean, that's an MVP caliber performance. Again, though, missed 100 games. The year after that, 2022, which is when he made the All-Star team, he played 92 games and he had a 133 OPS plus. Again, slugged above 500, 28 homers in 92 games. 2023 is the year where he was unable to even play defense. It was very obvious he was playing on like one leg and a bad hip.
Right. Yes. Right.
So his offense sunk.
Michael A. Taylor was our center fielder.
Right. Exactly. Right. And then last year, which we talked about, he played 102 games, which was his most in a very long time. 137 OPS plus, slugged over 500 again, batted .280, 18 homers in 102 games, racked up almost 4 wins above replacement. I think he was second last year in OPS among all center fielders behind Aaron Judge, who was playing a lot of center field last season and isn't this year. And then this year, we've talked about, he's basically played at that level, with the difference being he's played 80% of the games.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not, his performance has been, this is not any different it's subjective. Maybe it's slightly more consistent, slightly better, whatever it is. But for the most part, he's been playing at like a 120 to 140 OPS hitter level with very good defense in center field and excellent speed for like 6 or 7 years now, basically since 2019,
Sure.
other than 2023 when he was really hurt. The difference, though, is this year he's just been available far more often. And so that gets to the point that you're making. And that's what I think the frustration comes from is his performance in 2019 on, how old was he in 2019? He was 25 years old. So since he's 31 now, from the time he was 25 till now the time that he's 33 this season, he's played at an all-star, borderline MVP level. He's been a power hitter. He's been a very good center fielder. His overall value on a per game basis or a per month basis has been certainly top 10 in the American League consistently. But people get frustrated because you only see it for a month at a time, and then he misses 2 months or whatever. But that's in a weird way why it makes me more optimistic that he can maintain this if he stays healthy. I don't really have any questions at this point about his performance. Like he's answered that bell 6-7 years pretty much in a row. Like,
and seems to be adding things like plate discipline this year too. On top of it, I understand the frustration that people have had. What you just laid out is why people have been so frustrated with him, right? Is that you see the signs of, oh, this guy can be really, really good, and then it's snatched away from you. Right? It was snatched away from him too. Like he was feeling that frustration even more so. The Twins were feeling that frustration. Everybody was feeling that frustration. But you would see, stellar performance, and we would get on the podcast. We'd say, "You're missing it. You're missing it." He's had a 3-week stretch now where he's healthy and he's feeling good, and then the injury comes along, right?
Right.
But what we're seeing now over the last 2 years is that same, and I don't blame people for having tuned out, that they, at some point they just kind of gave up on waiting for it, or they're not ready to open their hearts yet to Buxton being both fantastic and healthy for a year and a half straight here. But it's been really fun to watch, and I would encourage people to jump back into the Buxton pool. How about that?
Well, and if anything, this shows how bad a shape his knee was in 2022 and especially 2023. And it's, I think, pretty remarkable and really speaks to just what an amazingly talented athlete he is, that he was able to be as good as he was in some of these years where he was so banged up and not able to run like he wants to. Think of it. Think of how many years we've seen Byron Buxton unable to run. When he got to the majors, that was the skill that everyone thought he had. There were questions about his bat, but it was like, this guy's going to steal 80 bases. Well, he's had years where he hasn't even attempted 10 steals because he's on one leg or he's missed time.
Right. Yes.
And he fully adapted into becoming a full-fledged, like middle of the order, 40 homer type of power hitter on a rate basis. And it's remarkable that he was able to be as good as he's been while as banged up and just flat out injured in some of these seasons. And so now I would say, like you pointed out, beginning last spring, where he was like, I didn't even know I could feel this good, basically. Exactly thankfully, other than the hamstring injury last year and the concussion this year, which are relatively minor injuries in the scope of things, he's been able to maintain that. And so I no longer have any questions about, the talent level or even the consistency. He's a streaky player, but at the end of the day, you look and the guy's he's been one of the 5 best hitters in the American League this year, last year. And, you add in the other things that he does. And I just hope people appreciate, like I said at the beginning of this discussion, like I truly believe this is one of the, I'll say 10, but you could probably make the argument of 5. And it's not like the Twins haven't had a bunch of great position players.
Right.
For a team that's been around.
Center fielders. Yeah.
Right. And, whether you want to look at the numbers and look at WAR, which I think he's now 9th all time in Twins WAR, despite the fact that he's played, 500 games fewer than everyone else in that grouping. Or you just want to watch the guy. You can't have watched him for the last 3 weeks and not had several moments, just several innings. He's had innings where he robs a hit and hits a 3-run homer 480 feet. He had a 10-minute period during this Red Series where he robbed a homer and hit a homer to the same spot.
One of the 5 longest home runs in Target Field history, by the way.
Yeah,
second longest home run.
The previous one.
That was the previous one, right?
Yeah.
At home.
That's probably the best inning I've ever seen a person play baseball, basically. And it's just been remarkable, and it's been fun to watch, not just from a fan perspective, but it's been fun to watch sort of his reaction to it, which is he doesn't have to spend, 3 hours before every game on the trainer's table just so he can run at 50% speed and be a DH and take 2 days off a week. And look, there are no guarantees with injuries ever. And there sure as hell are not any guarantees with Byron Buxton and health and injuries and all that. But man, he's been good. And man, was he good last year. And man, has he been good for like 6 of the last 7 years when his body has allowed him to do it. So I just think, where would they be at this point, especially just overall offensively, without him? And, you can toss in like Willie Castro and a couple of other guys who have played well recently. But man, Buxton has been good.
He's been carrying this lineup.
Before we talk about some less good things about the lineup, let's put it that way. Let's talk about our first sponsor, which also happens to be our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewery.
You can see their name up in the right-hand side of the video if you're watching the video, because they're a presenting sponsor. And the good news about Black Stack Brewing, I mean, they've always been known for their beer. They hang their hat on their beers. So some breweries hang their hat on, their location or on, their tap room or whatever, maybe the events that they throw. Black Stack has hung their hat on their beer. And the problem with that is that you couldn't always find their beer. It wasn't easy to find. It was basically in some specialty beer stores or, very few liquor stores. Not anymore. They've now got a brand new distributor. So you're able to find their incredible IPAs. Listen, their flagship is the local 755 New England IPA. You've got to start with that one, right? But you can find some of their other IPAs in other places as well. And they also make some, I think they've got the best Pilsner on the local market, Slopes French Pilsner. They've got some Pull Tabs Pale Ale. They've got a good strawberry rhubarb sour if you're looking for something a little more summer drinky. And then they've also got the tap room. You can also find them there, where you can find even more. You can find some of their more experimental IPAs there as well. So I would encourage you, go to your liquor store and try and find Black Stack Brewing in their cooler. You're not going to regret it. You're going to be able to bring it to parties, and everybody's going to be like, oh my goodness, who brought this good beer? So stop by Black Stack Brewing near 94 and 280, or even easier, ask for them at your local liquor store.
I'm going to parties in this scenario, John. Come on, buddy.
Keep it. Come to one last night, buddy.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm saying I don't go to parties. That's the. Yeah.
I know.
Let's talk about. Well, there aren't that many.
We watched the Pacers and the Knicks on a iPad, and you missed it.
Well, that sounds great. I'm sorry, I watched it from my couch on a huge television.
I enjoyed watching it because I had plus 4.5 with the Pacers, so that was an enjoyable game to watch.
We're proud of you, John. Great basketball mind, John bonus. We've proven that by our basketball episodes, which were very well rated on Patreon. People really love them.
We should mention the Patreon probably here.
Sure, yeah. We do. If you're just stumbling across this show on YouTube, we do this show every Friday, which we call the free show because it's free.
Not video yet, though. We haven't gotten the video yet on there, so you're going to have to suffer through the audio only.
Well, you've jumped the gun. I haven't even mentioned. Jesus, this hasn't changed. John's inability to track a conversation, unfortunately, is carried over to YouTube. I was setting this up, John. Come on, buddy.
Oh, okay.
Stay with it, buddy. You jumped to Patreon. I was talking about the free show, which people are watching. But if you like this, we do a Monday and Wednesday episodes on Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/Greenman. I think probably there's a link in the YouTube description for this very video that you may be watching. And if you're just listening on audio, as John just hinted at, jumped the gun at, those are audio only for now. For now. We'll see. We got, like I said at the beginning, we have some, for us at least, big plans. Hopefully. It's not gonna, New York Times isn't going to write about it or anything, even though I work for them. But for us in our world, big changes. And anybody who's listened to the show knows how much I despise all change. So this has taken quite a bit for me to jump in, but I think it'll be a good thing. So next up on the docket for topics here is a much less optimistic or exciting thing, which let's talk about Royce Lewis, who has been injured since our last free show, which I wonder how many times over the years we've said Royce Lewis has been injured since our last free show. Yeah. Here's another clip of Royce Lewis in Houston lining a ball down the line. That's what you guys on the audio only are missing out on. So
and then rounding first base and having the trainer come visit him.
So that hit that you just saw, if you're on the video version, raised his batting average above 200 for the first time in quite a while. And as you're also seeing in the video version, he made it about halfway to first base before he pulled up in discomfort with another left hamstring strain, which is the same injury that he suffered midway through, mid-March, midway through spring training. That one was a moderate hamstring strain, the diagnosis. This one has been diagnosed as a mild hamstring strain. The Twins, as they increasingly do, decided not to provide a timeline, but we can tell you that the moderate version typically centers around like 6 to 8 weeks. I think he ended up returning in 7.5 weeks, something like that. He missed the last 2 weeks of spring training and then the first 5 and change of the regular season. A mild one, maybe you're looking at 3 or 4 weeks, something like that. Although his history with leg injuries and just health in general makes me think that they probably aren't going to push it really, that they're, going to be on the longer side of this things. But realistically, like we talked about, we're 3 weeks from the All-Star break. That would seemingly be a thing they could kind of circle on the calendar and say, can we get him ready coming out of the All-Star break? What do they go to Colorado, I think, to begin the All-Star.
Yeah.
Like July 20, basically a month from now. And I'd love to see him back before then. But he's still probably in the just shutdown phase. Then he's going to have to ramp up with baseball activities. Then he's going to have to go on at least a brief minor league rehab assignment. So by the time you're well into July at that point. But good news in the sense that it's mild, bad news in the sense that it's another left hamstring strain. And both of these have occurred just kind
running
of
to first base,
running sort of hard to
Right.
first base. And he didn't even make it to first base in either of them. Like, he made it about 40 feet in both cases. And this year, and we sort of saw this from him in past years, but they've really said it this year. They told him just jog. Like, honestly, like just unless you're on like second base in the bottom of the ninth and someone hits a single and you got to score to win the game, just make your way around the bases with such caution and low speed.
Well, and if you saw the video that we just played, like it was a line drive down the left field line that went all the way to the wall. The reason, I presume it wasn't I can just jog my way to first base. He was thinking double because that's what you think when you get a ball that goes to the wall down the left field line. You get a double, and he was clearly thinking double and pushed himself a little bit to try and ramp it up to make it to second base, and ended up getting hurt before he got to first base. And standing on first base and with a trainer looking at him. So
I don't know what you do from that standpoint when you got a guy who's jogging 99% of the time, regardless of circumstance. And even in that, it's not like he was trying to win any sprints to first base. He just was running normally. His overall sprint speed this year is in the 13th percentile MLB wide, which it's sad because this is going to mirror some of the discussions with Buxton and his.
I was thinking that. Yeah.
When Royce Lewis was a prospect prior to blowing out his knee in both 2021 and then again in 2022, he was considered one of the probably 10 fastest players in baseball. And he would have been the fastest player in just about every organization that didn't have Byron Buxton at that time. He was a guy who was projected as a leadoff type of hitter for the same reasons we talked about with Buxton. He was projected as a 40 steal type of guy. He just had blazing speed. And even after the first torn ACL in 2021, when he came back, he was no longer that fast. He was still pretty fast, but he was just sort of normal fast. He wasn't like, oh my God, look at this guy run. And then when he almost immediately tore the same knee again in 2022, by the time he came back from that, he was a lot more bulked up, which has helped him add power, certainly.
Sure.
But also he just wasn't as fast. And that's, I think, just what happens.
He's not 13th percentile fast.
Right.
The reason he's 13th percentile fast is because he's definitely trying not to push himself because he's already had a strained hamstring once that took 2 months to come back from. And frankly, looked like he came back from that a little bit early.
Right. I would say if you got Royce Lewis healthy and you could, turn the injury settings off on the video game for a few months.
Sure.
I would say he's still probably an average or slightly above average runner. Like, he's probably in the 55th, 60th, 65th percentile. But the Twins have basically said it's not worth being a 55th percentile runner because you're not going to be stealing bases at that point. And so just jog your way around. And, it's a shame we never really got to see the extreme speed of him because by the time he got to the majors, he had already gotten hurt and his knees were blown out. And now we're not even getting to see him be like a normal base runner. But I just wonder, like, if you're at the point where a 25-year-old, who it's not like he's out of shape, he's in good shape. Like, it's not like he's some, big fat guy running around out there. I get why my knees hurt and why I have, muscle strains when I move, because, I'm a podcaster who didn't think until this week I would even ever be on video.
Let alone, right.
I got to lose like 100 pounds by next episode. I've decided. Just looking at my own face here. I don't know. Anybody who has ideas, drop them in the comments for how we can do that.
Left leg, maybe.
It's my legs are pretty useless at this point.
Just
anyway.
amputate it.
Yeah. I just really just need fingers to type and a head to now be on screen and talk.
Yeah. Which hip is it that's been acting up? Like, let's just get rid of that. Just start right there. Yeah.
I have a torn ACL in my left knee that I never fixed.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I have a spine on the right side that is botched.
Oh, that's the right one. Yeah.
So yes, my sprint speed is probably like -20, I would say, even in the podcasting realm. But I made him crack up. So you can tell John's laughing for real.
I'm excited to see the podcasting sprint speeds.
Oh yeah,
and see where they like up.
It gets ruined because like Trevor Plouffe is a podcaster. You know what I mean? Like,
that's a good point.
There are now athletes taking over.
Athletes, I know.
Yeah, this space. It should just be for fat schlubs like us who just
58-year-old fat schlubs.
Well, come on now. I'm only 60 and you're 76. So
that's right.
But yeah, it's a shame we haven't seen that. But I guess my question with that is like, what is there left to do from a preventative standpoint? Because if you look at his, I can read them off maybe if I can find this here. I mean, if you read through his injuries, obviously the first two were the torn ACLs. The second torn ACL was suffered, while he was chasing after a ball in the outfield which was a short-lived experiment, clearly. And so those ones are, acute injuries. Those are ones you point to and you go, oh, he crashed into the wall, he tore his knee. But since coming back from that in 2023, which was like mid-season 2023, now these have all occurred within the last 2 calendar years.
Yeah.
Okay. July of 2023, fresh off coming back from the second torn ACL, oblique injury.
Okay.
September of 2023, right before the playoffs, hamstring injury. And he actually ended up coming back into the playoffs, but he couldn't barely move, but he was hitting.
Was that left hamstring? Do you remember?
That I don't remember. March of 2024, quadriceps, which that was last year, opening day, basically, quadriceps. Yeah. July of 2024, so mid-season last year, adductor, which is sort of your groin muscle, basically. And then this March, left hamstring, and then this June, a week ago, left hamstring again.
Hamstring,
yeah. Those are all soft tissue, core muscle. Those are not broken bones. Those are not torn, ACLs. Yeah. Those are all things. And most of those have come while running or swinging. And
around the bases.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I don't know what you do with that, because guys are going to have to run and guys are going to have to swing in baseball. And,
you don't have a lot of ghost runners. You can't just touch them.
Right.
This isn't kickball. Yeah.
Yeah. This, we used to play in elementary school, so I was probably 3rd grade or whatever.
Yeah.
The last day of the year, last week of the year, would be kids versus teachers in kickball.
Right.
And we had a principal named Dr. Bennett, big fat guy. I mean, he'd have been a good podcaster back in the day. This was the late 80s, but or early 90s, I guess. And I just remember he would kick and there would be a child assigned to run for him. And I don't
ghost runner. Sure,
I don't mean pinch run for him once he got to first. I mean, the child would get into a sprinter stance at home plate.
Yeah.
And as soon as Dr. Bennett made contact with the kickball, the kid would go running.
That's
so they need
awesome.
that for Royce Lewis is basically what I'm saying. I'm going to find the child who did that in 1990.
That might explain why Kersey's on the roster.
Yeah, that wouldn't be the worst idea, honestly.
Yeah.
A little two-headed monster there. So, I mean, it's unfortunate. I think the especially unfortunate part with Lewis was, I'm not going to say he was back on track because I don't honestly believe that, but he was 11 for 28 in his previous 9 games, it's a 393 batting average. Like I said, he'd finally brought his overall batting average above 200. He had a homer. He was starting to hit the ball a little bit. As you said, when he got injured, he had ripped a line drive into the left field corner. These are small things, but he had been so bad for so long that even those small things were like, okay, it's a step in the right direction. So to get hurt when he was playing the best he had in months and months, dating back to last August, is like a real stomach punch to that. You know, like hopefully he's back within weeks rather than months. But yeah, terrible timing. And I think we talked more. We're not going to get super into this because it's like week old news, but this is an example of something we broke down for like 45 minutes right away the day after on the Patreon podcast. But their choice, you mentioned Kersey, he was their choice to replace him on the roster, despite the fact that, you know, their usage of Deshaun Kersey has been pretty minimal. He's got, I don't know, 60 at bats, even though he's been on the roster for like 2 months, basically.
He is the opposite of your principal. They don't want him at the actual plate. They just want him every place else in the game. It's
going to be great if either Dr. Bennett or one of his children or something are like, hey, 30 years later, you had to crap on him? Like, come on, man. He had a pituitary problem or he really likes donuts or, you know, whatever it was. Anyway, yeah, so they chose Kersey. And, you know, it makes logical sense. They had Kersey on the roster for almost the first 2 months of the season after he made the opening day roster. But they don't really use him. Like they're trying to minimize his plate appearances because I think he's a much better hitter than he's shown, but he's been abysmal at the plate. And he's certainly not an impact hitter. I mean, at best, he's sort of a marginal hitter.
Well, and I mean, even though he was sent down to St. Paul, he didn't really hit down there either.
Right.
Like, it's not like he went on a tear down there.
Yeah, he was down for like 2 weeks and then came back up. They're going to use him as a pinch runner for Dr. Bennett or otherwise.
And a defensive replacement.
And they're going to use him as a defensive replacement too, which we've seen. And he does those jobs pretty well. Although, to me, if that's going to be the role, such a limited role for a bench player, particularly for a team that is not, you know, overflowing in great offensive options, like can use as many bats, even part-time platoon bats, as they can get, which we'll get to in a second here, you got to be a lot better than pretty good as a base runner and a defensive replacement. And he's, you know, 5 out of 8 on steals. His most recent one was a strike him out, throw him out, Brooks Lee at the plate in the Cincinnati series, which really hurt him in the 8th inning of the game. Like, he's a pretty good base runner, but he's not an exceptional base runner when that's really the whole role. You would like a guy to just be like an incredible base runner.
He's definitely a guy who's going to score from second on a, you know, if you've got a slower, he can absolutely replace a slower guy. But if you're looking for somebody who's like, this guy's going to steal a base when we all know he's going to steal a base, it's not clear he's at that level. Now, even the time he got thrown out in that double play, which was in fact a killer, you know, it was also Brooks Lee swinging at a ball, you know, off the plate, and it was a bang play. Like, had they called him safe, I'm not sure they would have overturned it.
Sure.
And I'm not sure the fact that they called him out, they couldn't overturn it. Like, it was close, and Cincinnati was pretty good at shutting down any sort of semblance of the Twins running game that entire series. So I think they've got their act together on that. So I don't want to go too hard after him for that particular play. But yes, you would like to, if he was just a touch better in terms of stealing bases, to the point where you put him in like, oh, now he's a real weapon. And right now he feels like, well, he's a good role player. He's got a good role on this team, and they need some speed, and they need, frankly, some defensive help in the outfield sometimes. Yeah, you would like him to be just a touch better in sort of stealing bases and becoming that weapon.
Yeah, I mean, if he were more a traditional 4th or 5th outfielder and he was starting a few games a week and he was, you know, actually hitting more than, you know, 1 start a week or something like that, he's a really solid runner and a really solid defender for that role. But when the role is basically just using your legs and not your bat, you can find guys for that role, if that's going to be how limited, you know, and specific the role is, who are really good. And going back to sprint speed, which we mentioned earlier, I just looked, Deshaun Kersey is in the 86th percentile for sprint speed, which is awesome. That's second best on the Twins. That's really, really fast. But it's probably below average if you're just comparing him to guys who are the 13th last guy on the bench who only pinch run and play defense. Those guys are all 95. You know, those guys are Buxton speed or, you know, whatever. So the fact that they chose Kersey, I don't think has as much to do with Kersey beyond the fact that they're just comfortable kind of letting him collect dust a little bit and using him very sparingly. But it has more to do with them not having any real confidence that the more straightforward, or the bigger name at least, AAA options are going to actually boost an offense that needs it. And, you know, I'm talking about Miranda. I'm talking about Edouard Julien. I'm also talking about Mickey Gasper and Carson McCusker, who have been the Saints' 2 best hitters this year, but are both, you know, elderly for a prospect, and one was signed out of indie ball. The other one's 5'6" with a mustache. Like there's skepticism abound with those two. And then with Julien and Miranda, they just haven't performed with any sort of consistency at AAA.
Yeah. Julien's been a little bit hotter lately. I mean, I'll be interested to, if you're not paying attention to the Saints, and by lately I mean like the last 2 weeks, he's hitting 350 or something like that. And what's more, he's hitting with some power, which we really did not see much from him. It was one of the things, and he's been getting on base. I mean, you mentioned that's the one part of his game that he has seemed to figure out at St. Paul, is he seems to be getting on base much more consistently, and lately he's been hitting with a little bit more power. I'm not saying he's due for a call-up. What I'm saying is it's worth kind of paying attention to what he develops over the next couple weeks to see if, especially with, although Cody Clemens hit the big home run last night, which was great, or yesterday afternoon, which was great, but they could he's definitely regressed back to more what we thought Cody Clemens was going to be. It'd be interesting to see if Edouard Julien can go back to where we hoped Edouard Julien was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, they would definitely like to see that. When I say they weren't called up because they're struggling, I don't mean like they've been written off. They're still on the 40-man roster. They're still playing every day for the Saints. If they put together a stretch, believe me, the Twins would love nothing more than to add another competent bat who can play the infield to this group, because that's what they desperately need, especially while Lewis is out. But I will also say, Miranda hit I think he went 3 for 3 yesterday. So, it's possible these guys show some signs of life, but their overall numbers, you would expect guys with, 3 seasons of big league experience each and some pretty, long stretches of success to go to AAA and just destroy, for, the light to come on and say, I'm going to turn my career around here. I couldn't believe I was demoted. Let me just go crush the International League for 2 months and force my way back to the majors. They just haven't done that. Now, that doesn't mean they can't do that. They can't hit their way back to the majors. I'll also note with Julien,
they both looked lost in April and May,
right?
To be honest,
And with Julien, he's got a 400 on base percentage at AAA, which is very good. Except we've seen from Julien that comes from passivity, and that is not something that he can, continue against polished big league pitchers. We've seen that. I mean, I'm not saying he can't draw walks. He will draw walks, and he'll get on base when he's going well. I'm just saying, what I'm looking for at AAA is the hitting component. Is you can't hit 250 with 3 homers over 40 games and draw 50 walks and have a 400 on base percentage. That's great at AAA. I mean, he's been fine at AAA, but I know how that converts to the majors. I know how that becomes exploitable specifically for Edouard Julien. If he's not doing damage to the baseball, they'll just pound the strike zone against him and they'll throw off-speed putt stuff. So,
and that's why I'm encouraged by his last couple of weeks, because about half of his hits have been extra base hits, which is something that much different than we saw from Edouard Julien earlier in the year. So
the other tricky part, they could have called up Gasper, they could have called up McCusker. I wrote about Gasper this morning at The Athletic. If people want a deeper look at some of his numbers at AAA, I probably would have called someone up other than Deshaun Kersey, one of the 4 guys we just mentioned. Because at this point, the Twins offense has been so poor for so long and so inconsistent, and they're running out so many guys. First of all, their bench is filled with like 2 or 3 guys every game that they have no interest in playing, whether it's Kersey or Bride or Vasquez, etc. Even if someone like McCusker, they don't believe in him. McCusker could at least start a couple times a week in left field or DH against a lefty and maybe try to pop a homer. I get why they don't believe in Gasper, because he was bad in 30 plate appearances with them early in the season, and he's a 29-year-old journeyman. He's led the International League in OPS the last 2 years. Like, they're not in a position to say they don't have at-bats for a guy. Even if you're pretty skeptical, give him a month and see. Maybe there's something there. So I certainly would have leaned more towards that versus bring Kersey up so that he can pinch run twice a week or something. I just don't think that's a efficient, smart use of a roster spot, particularly on a team that's already got Bride barely playing. It's got a backup catcher that they don't want to hit. It doesn't surprise me that they didn't take that approach, but that's what you have in Kersey. And, the people who hated how much platooning Baldelli did the last few years probably should be enjoying this. The two things that used to rile people up in, let's say, 2023, or even the beginning of last year when they were doing pretty well offensively and they were winning, where the team strikes out way too much and they do too much mixing and matching. They play the matchups. They platoon too much. The young left-handed hitters don't get a chance. Well, this year, they're striking out less often than an average team. Their strikeout rate has gone down huge amount compared to 2 years ago. And they're not platooning as much, and they're not making these in-game, kind of hockey line change substitutions.
Right.
Not because they've ceased believing that that's effective. It's just they don't have the pieces on the bench anymore.
Yeah.
They don't have good pieces to swap lefty righty, and so sadly
we're seeing Larnach and Wallner with a lot more at bats versus left-handers. Yeah,
exactly.
Right. Which I guess makes a lot of people very happy.
Except for the fact that it hasn't produced good offense. It turns out mixing and matching and playing the matchups and platooning, and also occasionally striking out a lot, because strikeouts tend to come with power hitting, and they've been severely lacking in that. So they're making a bunch of contact.
Yeah,
it's just a bunch of not good contact. So I will be curious, if obviously if another person gets hurt in the next set before Lewis comes back, let's say, they're going to have to turn to somebody who's more of an offensive threat at AAA, because maybe you get to the point where Manuel Rodriguez or Keisho or Austin Martin is healthy because they're all injured.
Sure.
That played a part in it too.
Right.
It's possible one or both of more of those guys would have been called up instead of Kersey too. But yeah, that's what they're facing. I just feel like they need more buttons to push offensively than they have. And that's not going to fix everything. I mean, if your core guys don't hit, there's no amount of platooning and mixing and matching and pinch hitting that's going to fix it. But their lineup is just so limited with what they can do. And they're now even at the point, like against lefties, where they're playing two lefties in these lineups, and they're just sort of giving up those spots because, Larnach's had some okay moments, but he's hitting 170 against lefties. Wallner's not hitting lefties. Then they probably never will. That's just the reality of most left-handed hitters. But they no longer have the Kyle Farmers or the Michael Taylors or what they thought Manuel Margot was going to be, which he wasn't, to kind of play those matchups. So now they're just running out these lineups, and they're just like, go do it. Like, you're going to play, which is fine, except these guys aren't really producing.
Did I mention I saw Manny Margot play versus the Saints the other night? I went to the Saints game on Wednesday night. Manny Margot was on the Detroit AAA Toledo Mud Hens team. Manny Margot was batting 8th as the DH for the AAA Toledo Mud Hens, because he's hitting 204 entering that game. So I watched him strike out a few more times. Might be the Manny Margot's just about done. So.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot last year when we were wondering if they would cut him, which they didn't. But I've really never look. I mean, there's a saying, a guy on the wrong side of 30 for athletes. Sure. It can fall apart in a hurry. We've seen that. It's happened to great players. It's happened to mediocre players. It happens across all sports. So in that sense, it's not shocking. But I don't think I've ever seen a guy who, and how old was he last year? He wasn't even that old. I'm looking at him.
29?
Yeah. I mean, he was, let's see. Last year was his age 29 season.
Yeah.
I've never seen a guy fall off so quickly that it happened before the season started. In other words,
where he showed up at spring training and they thought,
it's so strange. Right. They were trying to re-sign Michael A. Taylor, who, as you mentioned earlier in the show, had essentially been the everyday center fielder in 2023 because Buxton was limited to DH duties,
and felt like he should get a free agent deal similar to that of a starting center fielder, because he had a decent year as a starting center fielder, and I'm not sure he was wrong. But turns out that there's only so many chairs in musical chairs, and when you've got too many people and not enough chairs, he was the one that was left standing. By the end, the free agent market kind of resolved itself as Harrison Bader signed with somebody, and I mean, there were a few other center fielders that could fill that role, and he was looking for starting center fielder money when what was available was backup center fielder money.
And the Twins I can report this for sure. They were trying to re-sign Michael A. Taylor. They wanted to basically run it back, even though they were more optimistic about Buxton's health, and that proved to be accurate. Buxton started a lot of games in center field last year.
Right. They
wanted to have Taylor around as Buxton insurance again, but also figuring he could play some corner. He could be a right-handed bat off the bench, et cetera, et cetera. But they didn't have any money last offseason, same as this offseason. And they were offering him, who knows, $4 million, $5 million, whatever it was. And he wanted $8 million, $9 million, $10 million.
Right.
And they, at some point, as spring training started, they were like, this just isn't going to happen with our budget with Michael A. Taylor. We have to find an alternative. And so they traded for Manuel Margot, who was a prior to that had been a pretty good defensive outfielder
and was
right?
making a lot more money than that. But
yes, as part of the trade, the Dodgers and the Rays took like over half his salary on. And
they
so,
ended up having the Twins had to end up paying him for something like $4 million, which is
Yes.
about what we thought they were offering to
Right.
center fielders like Michael A. Taylor. Right?
and about 3 days after the Twins traded for Manuel Margot, the Pirates signed Michael A. Taylor. You want to guess how much he signed for?
$4 million.
$4 million. And I can tell you unequivocally, if even 1 week prior to that, he would have said he'd take $4 million, he would have been back with the Twins, and Manuel Margot would never have been on the Twins.
Sure.
But then this brings me to last spring. They pull off the trade for Manuel Margot, and I'm standing there, and he walks into the clubhouse on day one, and you look at him, and we talk to him, and, he looks like you've seen him on TV. And about 3 days later, they're not playing him in center field, even in like spring games.
Right.
And people are like, yeah, we can't play him in center field.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what did he leave his range on the plane? Like on the plane over here? And really, he never recovered. Like he never looked different than that. He always looked terrible in center. I would argue he looked pretty lost in left field, which is
he looked really bad in left field.
Yeah. And then he didn't hit the whole year. And that is one of the most extreme, sudden, like even before the fact, examples of a guy just completely being cooked, just falling off a cliff. And the fact that now you're watching him bat 8th and DH for a AAA team a year later.
Right.
I would like to someday hear what happened to Manny Margot. Like, did his deal with the devil expire? Did he?
Well, especially because he was sort of like in the rotation with Tampa in the outfield. Like he wasn't necessarily a full-time guy, but he
played
400
at bats a year.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, and then and as such, you can kind of sort of tab him as, oh, this is an undervalued player. There's a guy who could, potentially be a fringe starter type person. And then instead he falls off the map to the point where he can't even, and I mean, even in the role that he was in, which is like guy off the bench, he was especially dismal in that role as as a pinch hitter. So,
well, no, to be fair, he was only the least successful pinch hitter in the history of baseball, John.
Correct.
You don't have to be mean to the guy. Before we get to some other stuff, let's talk about our last couple of sponsors here.
You can unfortunately see our hair here on video.
How we looking?
Not great. But what we should probably be taking a second look at is Hims, because Hims is a way that you can explore your hair options without having to go through the rigmarole of going and seeing a doctor locally and jumping through it's an obstacle-free way to do it. It provides convenient access to a range of hair loss treatments that work all from the comfort of your couch. It makes it simple with doctor-trusted options, and you can regrow hair in like 3 to 6 months, and you can choose how you're doing it. And it's simple. And it's 100% online. There's no uncomfortable doctor visits that you have to go to. You don't even need insurance. No insurance is needed. At one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care.
You can start your free online visit today at hims.com/Gleeman. That's HIMS, hims.com/Gleeman for your personalized hair loss treatment options. hims.com/Gleeman. And now I'm going to read this. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. Now people can see how amazing I am at reading.
I'm impressed with your disclaimer game.
You know who would be really proud of that? My old principal, Dr. Bennett.
Didn't even stumble over finasteride.
Well, yeah, I said it better than that for sure. Let's talk about our last sponsor here.
Yeah, so I'm somebody that in the morning when I have trouble with caffeine. So coffee is not a great option for me for the morning. So I've tried some other things like some of the kind of energy drinky supplements kind of thing. I'm going into a morning show on KFAN on a semi-regular basis or on a weekly basis or something. I don't want to get too much caffeine because I get jumpy and crabby and it bothers me the rest of the day. So I've tried some of these other, powdered type things, especially some of the greenish ones. Haven't had a lot of luck, but I found one that I like, which is Factor Form. Factor Form Daily Greens has been, first of all, it dissolves super quickly. So it doesn't give you that that feeling in your mouth of when you're drinking, a powdered thing. And just one scoop delivers 100% of your daily nutrients. It gives me a lot of energy. It tastes good. It's I think it's been judged as one of the best tasting of these out there. I like it. And it's made from real vegetables, packed with a whole serving of kale and spinach without tasting like it. In a blind taste test, Daily Greens ranked #1 in taste, texture, and aroma, beating out the biggest names in the industry. It's packed with prebiotics, probiotics, supports gut health. It's everything you need without mega doses or added sugars or artificial fillers. So I would suggest you try it. I think it definitely made me provided less bloat and sharper focus.
You can start your day right with Daily Greens by Factor Form. Go to factor75.com/Kleeman to get 40% off, and they'll give you free shipping on your first order. That's factor75.com/Kleeman for 40% off plus free shipping. Factor75.com/Kleeman. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know, just to finish up on some lineup stuff. Correa talked, I'm actually hoping to talk to him this weekend because I was writing something that I need a couple thoughts on, but he talked to the beat writing crew in Cincinnati, and nothing crazy in the quotes. He's always pretty smart about it. I mean, he's one of the smartest baseball players I've ever seen or met. And, he talked a lot about, I guess I can read you a full quote here. He was one, there's one of his rare hits this month, maybe. I don't know. Actually had a pretty decent series in Cincinnati. Drew a few walks,
yes.
Had a couple of hits, but
especially the last game, right?
Yeah, but June has been a real struggle for him overall, and that's coming off a very encouraging, big uptick in performance during May after a bad April. His overall numbers are still really bad, and they're bad in like weird ways, in that like his walk rate has kind of fallen apart. The strikeout rate is not any different, but he's just kind of hitting the ball less hard overall. I mean, we've talked about this on almost a weekly basis all season, kind of trying to figure out what's going on with Correa. So he talked a lot about that. Dan Hayes wrote a good article about it on The Athletic with all the quotes and everything. But it's interesting because to me, he represents like the prime example of what the overall lineup's issue is, the most extreme example of it, which is they just need him to be Carlos Correa. And the reality is we can talk all we want about, who the last bench guys are, and they're not platooning, and they lack this and they lack that. If the guy they're paying like $37 million a year to be an all-star shortstop, if he's one of their worst hitters, they're probably not going to have a very good offense. And there are other guys kind of in that same boat to lesser degrees, obviously.
Sure. Right.
And that to me, and we had a long discussion about this in some past episodes too. It's like, can you fix this lineup from within? Can you fix this lineup?
Better yet, can you fix it from without? The answer is probably no. And the answer is this lineup has to fix itself.
Right. And
Dr. Heal Thyself is where we're at this point with this lineup. Like there's enough guys in this lineup that either you've got to, if it keeps going like this, you've got to make some hard decisions about your plan was wrong. Like these guys are not going to ever reach the level that we need them to perform at for them to be in the postseason, or they have to start showing that. And one of the key factors in that is that guy who's getting paid the most money at the top of the lineup. He has to be performing like he's being paid the most money at the top of the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, even if you just sort of took the preseason projections for the Twins lineup and you said, we're going to alter these now by taking Carlos Correa from a 125 OPS plus, which is what he was probably projected around, to an 85 OPS plus. That alone would take them from a very good lineup to a very bad lineup. So it's an interesting thing because it's like, how do you sort of make your way around that without and to other versions of that less so? We already talked about Julien, we talked about Miranda. There are certainly other guys who are in the majors too that you can talk about with that, where it's like if the guys you were counting on, Correa at the top, but also some lesser guys who are still core pieces, are not doing it, how do you kind of shake up and still put forth an above average lineup, especially when Royce Lewis is injured, but he wasn't really productive before that.
Right.
Keisha's injured, but Keisha played 5 games in the majors. Viewing him as a savior is, wishful thinking. Emmanuel Rodriguez, same thing.
Wallner was really good at the beginning of the season. He hasn't been great since he came back. Trevor Larnach hasn't really taken the next step that you were hoping that he would take after, treading water last year. He seems to be just still sort of treading water this year.
Yeah. And so my question with that is there any sort of configuration or alignment from a roster standpoint, a platooning standpoint, a role standpoint, or a batting order standpoint, where this group, this same core, which is largely the same core that struggled down the stretch last year so much, that this same core can be an above average lineup? And if not, you can look to the minors, but some of those guys are hurt and some of those guys just aren't ready. Is it a matter of you have to go out and get 2 bats at the trade deadline? And my question with that is okay, maybe they have the flexibility to just go target bats as opposed to we need a specific position, which does help you. They've shown no ability or no willingness to go pay monetary prices or prospect prices to add anything of that impact. So that's what kind of worries me is is Correa cooked? Yeah. Is this sort of one horrible month and he talks about making adjustments and then he has a pretty good 3 weeks and then he goes back in the tank? Is that just sort of shielding what is an overall decline in, skill set or hand-eye coordination or whatever it is? Or is he just so out of whack that at some point soon it's going to click for him and he's going to have a good stretch again? They need that because without Correa being a very good player, I just don't think they have the other pieces in place from a lineup standpoint to be a good lineup, particularly when of the 6 other guys that you might mention, other than Buxton and Castro, nobody's really doing it. And I guess maybe Jeffers is still putting together some good numbers.
I mean, that's what you're hoping for, right? You're hoping in general, as you take a look at the overall group, that when one guy falls off, you're gonna have just as many guys overperform on sort of their projections than those that are underperforming, right? But when one of the reasons those projections for the Twins offense were fairly optimistic was because you had some guys in that lineup who had pretty high bars for expectations, and Correa is one of those guys. And if he's not at least an average, if he's a below average hitter, when you expect him to be above average hitter, that's a lot for somebody else to make up.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing for him to have a off year. It's another thing for him to go from an all-star to one of the worst hitters on the team. You're just not going to be able to make up for that. We should know Brooks Lee, by the way, has picked up quite a bit of the slack.
Right. Yeah,
it's so funny. I wrote a article.
Nice timing, Cleveland.
2.5. Well, it was because the premise of the article was, why does Rocco Baldelli talk about Brooks Lee as if he's already a good hitter when he's not a good hitter? Right. And it was all about why Baldelli has faith in Brooks Lee and some of the underlying metrics and all this stuff. I posted that. What day was it? Let me look. That article was published on the morning of, let me look. I want to be accurate here. Let's see. The morning of May 28th. At the time, he was hitting 230 and he had like a 600 OPS. He has a hit in every game since then. 18 consecutive games. Yeah, exactly. The hit streak started about 8 hours after I posted that article. And it has continued the whole time. And look, I don't, everybody's going to look good during a hitting streak. So I don't think it's, we can proclaim him amazing yet. But it is an interesting example of a manager or a coaching staff seeing different things than maybe the numbers would suggest, particularly with a young player. And we were getting questions like, why are they batting him third, fourth, fifth in the lineup?
I mean, it wasn't just that he was always in the lineup. It was the way he was batting in the lineup.
Right.
That was drawing our attention.
The thing that kind of made me write that is because I would ask Baldelli a couple days in a row. We were having a conversation about Brooks Lee. And I was just struck by how overwhelmingly positive the quotes were, even relative to some other young players that he likes. And he was truly talking about him as if he had full confidence, as if he had no doubt that this guy was going to not only be a hitter in the majors, a good hitter, but basically was already a good hitter in the majors, despite the numerical evidence not being, along with that. And so I am fascinated but immediately he goes on an 18-game hitting streak. And so I'll certainly put him with Castro and Buxton and Jeffers as guys who are
Agreed.
performing, and that's not something that should be brushed aside, not just this year, but longer term. He's going to be a big piece of their lineup.
And just going back to your point about, overperforming, underperforming, and whether or not you can get help from within or without, a lot of the Twins' concerns started because it became clear that it was going to be tough for them to get help from without once the payroll dropped $40 million. When you've got an ownership situation where they are clearly being careful about how much they invest in the team and where things are up in the air about the future of the team. We've got a trade deadline coming up, and we're going to be talking about it. We're going to be talking about a lot on the Patreon, patreon.com/GameMove. We're going to go through all the rumors, all the options, all the things that are going on there. But the question is and in fact, the Twins management team, I think, has done a decent job of creating enough flexibility in the lineup that you don't have to go get like a center fielder. You don't have to go get a shortstop or a third baseman if Royce Lewis is out. You've got enough pieces that you can move around that you can just go get the best possible hitter that other teams probably can't bid against you on because they don't have room for a DH on their roster. The Twins are going to have that kind of flexibility. But if you don't have, so theoretically, you can get help from without to sort of help this lineup. But not if ownership isn't willing to throw a couple $1 million at a new salary.
Well, and so, not if the front office isn't willing to part with a decent prospect or two, which we've also run into. And it's a combination. I mean, they kind of go hand in hand a little bit. If the ownership isn't willing to take on salary, you need the trading team to take on salary. Then you got to send them better prospects. So yeah, I agree with that.
Well, and we hear this right after the trade deadline all the time, which is, hey, we know within the locker room we got to fix this. You hear that after the trade deadline. They got to start. We got to hear that before the trade deadline at this point. Like in the middle of June, it's clear this has got to be fixed inside because it's not necessarily going to be fixed from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, if this is a third year in a row where the clubhouse is basically like, okay, they didn't do anything, we got to fix it from within. I mean, okay, I guess they did it in 2023. They didn't do it last year, so
right. That's right.
Third time is a charm, maybe. Let's talk a little bit just to finish up here on some pitching stuff. Because we spent pretty much all the time on the lineup so far, but they do still have a pitching staff. So Joe Ryan now is the arm around which the entire rotation rotates, I suppose. Where it's like Bailey Ober, who we're now watching video of, had a pretty decent bounce back start, or at least a somewhat encouraging bounce back start in Cincinnati, although it still wasn't a good start. He allowed 4 runs, 9 hits, but the velocity was ticking back up a little bit. He was 90, 91 instead of 88, 89, which is good to see. He had 5 strikeouts, no walks after walking uncharacteristically 6 guys in his previous outing. And some of his quotes afterward were basically saying, like, I'm finally starting to feel mechanically like I can just start to pitch now instead of worrying on every pitch how my hip feels and whether my mechanics are out of whack. So this is one of those things we're going to have to see it, obviously, more than one start, but it's at least he's halted the weeks-long negative trend.
Sure.
And has at the very least like paused it with this start against the Reds, where now you can at least envision, okay, well, maybe he's a little bit better placed physically that he can start to push forward. But I don't know how you can really have much confidence, because the truth is, a month ago, this would have been a bad Bailey Ober start.
Yeah, right.
And so the fact that we're now like, oh, it's pretty encouraging to see him do this. And I don't disagree relative to the 3 previous starts, which were terrible. But, with him as a big question mark, you're basically flipping coins on both Festa and Simeon Woods-Richardson, whether they can make it through 5 decent innings. And that's not denigrating their long-term potential or their upside, but that's just how it's been so far. These are young pitchers.
And this last time through the rotation, and I think most times through the rotation with them, it's been 1 heads, 1 tails. Like, it's, like this last time, Simeon Woods-Richardson looked great for 5 innings to the point we were questioning whether or not he should be leaving the game. And then Festa looks great through 4 2/3 innings to the point where he ends up, getting knocked around on a 3-2 count with 2 outs and a couple runners on base, and suddenly there's 4 runs in.
Right.
And you're like,
So, Ober is a big question mark. Those 2 are basically coin flips to have decent starts or leave after 3 2/3, whatever it is. Yeah. And now Paddock, well, he certainly wasn't as bad in Cincinnati as he was the previous start when he gave up 9 runs.
Sure.
Wasn't the best. Velocity was down gave up.
We often comment the other direction, whereas a really good pitching start is overlooked because the offense just didn't score enough runs to get away with it. Paddock had a pretty mediocre start, maybe even a slightly bad start for him, but nobody cares because they scored 12 runs and which turned it into a laugher. Yeah,
which is funny because he had a 12 start stretch where he had a 2.51 ERA, and they scored like so few runs to support him that they went 3-9 in those 12 games.
Right. Yeah, he deserved that one. He had this one coming.
It evens out a little bit. So I guess big picture. I mean, the rotation now is Joe Ryan, who's been consistently very good.
Yeah.
Chris Paddock, who I guess I have fewer questions about than the other three, but I still have some questions about him suddenly.
Sure, of course.
Not even suddenly, but given his injury history and durability and all that. Bailey Ober, who's clearly trying to get back on track from mechanical issues, a hip problem, whatever it is, and has not looked like himself in a month, basically. And then essentially two rookies, or second-year guys, who you're just trying to coax 4 or 5 decent innings, and you can go to your bullpen.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say that's the worst rotation in the league by any stretch, but it's no longer a good rotation. And they are now so dependent on Joe Ryan, giving them 6 good innings every 5th game, that it makes me nervous, like on his behalf. Like, if he just has a bad start, he gives up 5 runs in 4 innings or something like that, which he's human. What does the rest of that week look like for the rotation? Like, what does the other 4 games in that rotation turn look like? And, we've talked about how the lineup doesn't look capable of stepping up to carry anything. And I think that's what we've sort of seen now for the last 2 or 3 weeks, which is like not a horrible pitching staff, but an inconsistent pitching staff where it's like every other game is good, every other game is bad. And then the lineup once a week puts up a bunch of runs like they did in the last game in Cincinnati, but otherwise is scoring 1, 2, 3 runs. And the pitching is just no longer consistently good enough to win like that. And so now I just look, and even their overall numbers this season, they have a below average offense and basically an average pitching staff. Well, that'll get you to 37 and 37. And so we kind of opened the show talking about this team is so difficult to figure out and so difficult to be like, what are we looking at here? It is in terms of the roller coaster day to day, week to week, month to month. But also you're sitting 37 and 37.
Right.
You got a slightly below average offense and a slightly above average pitching staff. That's 500 right there.
That's right.
But the worrisome thing is the pitching seems to be trending pretty rapidly because of injuries in a negative direction. Whereas I don't know that you can really say that the lineup is trending in any sort of positive direction. So that's the worry. That's
that's why you end up losing 6 in a row, right? I mean, that's why you end up with a streak over the last 3 weeks, which we've sort of seen of, a 393 or whatever winning percentage. So, I mean, they're going to have to. It's a journey, I mean, we were worried in April that we wouldn't have a journey, that we would just have a sink right to the bottom after that miserable start, and after watching the end of last year, that was the narrative. And we got to the point where like, okay, well, at least we're going to have a season. Well, this is the season. Like a season is a lot of ups and a lot of downs. And right now those ups have matched the downs because they are exactly a 500 team right now. And we'll have to see where they go from here. So
one non or off field thing that I wanted to note, because we've talked about this general topic now for a year, is that it sounds like the Tampa Bay Rays be sold to a Jacksonville real estate guy for somewhere around $1.7 billion. And if that number sounds familiar, it's because that is the precise price tag that the Twins reportedly have been seeking, even turning down a $1.5 billion bid. It's interesting that the Tampa Bay Rays, with no ballpark, really.
Yeah, I was going to say, that seems an overpriced version for Tampa.
Yeah, I just wonder if we're at the point now where any baseball team or any NBA team or any football team has sort of a baseline price that is a lot higher than you might have expected.
It might be.
Where it's like there's only 30 of these and realistically only 10 of them are going to be for sale in the next 2 decades. And so what if you're a Florida businessman who has more money than God, what are your options? Like if you don't buy the Tampa Bay Rays, what are you going to buy for significantly less than $1.7 billion? Certainly the $1.7 billion price tag should help the Twins.
I would think so.
Because it's difficult, at least in my pea brain, to come up with a reason why the Tampa Bay Rays, with no ballpark and really one of the smaller fan bases in terms of attendance,
Right.
now they've been as or more successful than the Twins on the field, but it's not like they've been world beaters over the last.
That hasn't led to any significant, huge revenue windfall for them, right?
And so it's difficult for me to like kind of comprehend, and I could just be viewing this wrong, but like, why would they be worth significantly more, hundreds of millions of dollars more than the Minnesota Twins? I suppose you can make the argument that just the Florida market in general, but I mean, the Marlins certainly haven't taken advantage of the Florida market. And there's also, Florida has the same problem that, there are a couple other markets where there's so many transplants that they sort of, there's a lot of, Red Sox fans and Yankees fans living in Florida. And so it's maybe not as easy to convert a bunch of 65-year-old retirees who came from elsewhere and now live in Florida,
yes, of course.
Become Rays fans. And so ultimately, though, viewing it from a Twins lens, which we view everything pretty much from a Twins lens, seems like good news for the Twins. But then also you think, okay, well, now since the Twins were officially put on the market, which was in late October, early November, basically.
Yeah, October, November, yeah.
The Rays have been sold or in the process of being sold, and the White Sox have essentially been kind of eventually sold to Justin.
To be fair, we get an assist for that.
Sure, yeah, why not? They should get a finder's fee.
The Twins get an assist for that.
I know, not us.
Yeah. Not you and I.
If I thought we'd get a finder's fee, I'd have retired from this podcast a long time. We'd never have made video, John. Or you just see me here counting my money, basically. But it's interesting that like 2 of the other 29 teams have now sold in the time since the Twins were put on the market. And, we saw the valuation that Ishbia, or the reported valuation that Ishbia, which is like closer to $2 billion, it was 1.9 or something like that. And now the Rays are getting 1.7, and yet the Twins are sitting here and, who knows, they could get sold tomorrow. But it sure seems like from some of the speculation and reports and just talking to people that they don't feel like there's a whole lot of, trending in the right direction or positive momentum towards a imminent sale of the Minnesota Twins. And so, it just seems like a sort of an odd situation for them to be in, where you hit the market, and while you're trying to get what you want for this team, and what I would sort of surmise the market has told you it's not worth,
right?
At least relative to the debt you've accrued and behind the scenes looking at some of the books and all that. 2 other teams have just gone and sold for right around or more than what you were asking for. It's interesting. And the Lakers, I'm sure you saw this.
I saw that, right? Yeah.
$10 billion valuation for a majority share in the Lakers.
I did take a look when that Rays deal came through, what their valuation was by Forbes, because if you recall, the Twins valuation by Forbes was like $1.6 billion.
Yeah.
And that's about what they were asking. The Rays was 1.25, and now they're selling for 1.7. So that does, either this real estate guy's way overpaying, which is certainly possible, because the White Sox, the $2 billion that Forbes valued them is about what Ishbia is sort of buying them at, which is also similar. Like, it gives a little bit of credence to Forbes' valuation of the Twins, which means, if their valuation is 1.5, 1.6, and the Twins are reported seeking 1.7, well, you can see why they might have a little bit of a problem, which, we talk about it in points, but each of those points is $100 million. You can understand why maybe the buyer might be a little more interested.
What's $100 million
in saving $150 million?
Nah. Haven't you ever gotten some food delivered and you go, you know what, I'm gonna do the express delivery, throw in another $2. That's what this is, really.
That's right. Yeah.
They want
to be fair, with the pull-out sale, I would love to order the express delivery.
Oh God. Yeah. It's funny now, we've gotten to a point, when they made that announcement in early November or whatever, that the team was for sale, we were starting to think, well, it's obviously too late, even at that early date, to positively affect their offseason in terms of like a new owner coming in and saying, hey, boys, you got $50 million to spend, go nuts. But our hope at that time was maybe the trade deadline.
Right.
Well, the trade deadline's 3 weeks away.
Yeah, that's not happening.
4 weeks away.
Absolutely not happening.
That's clearly not happening.
What they're going to affect this offseason is the new question, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a downer. Unlike all the other topics other than Buxton that we discussed on this show. We
should spend more time on Willie Castro.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. If we would have said, let's wait to launch video until we have a winning streak and a really fun batch of topics to talk about, we might both be dead by that point.
Well, also, we would also be betraying sort of the history of this entire podcast.
That's
We
true.
started this podcast in August of 2011 when they were about to undergo about a 6-year slump.
Yeah. Although I am happy
After
that
a decade of being competitive.
I am happy that we didn't start it at the beginning of 2011, because I think if we had started it at the beginning of 2011, people would blame us for the franchise going to hell for the next decade. But we started it after that had already happened, which doesn't speak to us being smart as businessmen.
No, it does.
But it does speak to us not being the cause of this thing collapsing, which is a load off my mind at least. But
I think we're 1 for 2 on that, though, because we both started blogging around 2002, which is about the time that the Twins started being good after a decade of being bad. So we played one right and we played one wrong. How about that?
Yeah. Okay. Although I didn't start blogging until August of 2002. So they were already,
that's what I said.
They were already doing pretty well there. It's the same thing. I kind of hopped on the good train.
Well, that's a little bit.
I didn't know it was going to be
pretty
good for a decade, but we also hopped on a bad train. We probably didn't think they were going to, lose an average of 97 games a year for our first 6 years. It is really a minor miracle that we, how many years later, 14, 15 years later, are still doing this, when the first 6 years we did the podcast, they were like the worst team in the American League, which
I'm really hoping we are not bringing another decade of dismalness to this franchise by launching video right now.
I no longer have the energy or the patience to put up with that. I'm no longer the young, impressionable young man. I'm now a jaded old man who does hair loss ads and uses himself as an example. And John's honestly almost 100, so this can't go on that much longer.
Speaking of that, we should probably thank our sponsors, Hair Loss Ads, which was Hims, and also Factor Form and their greens. And then also a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, which is Black Stack Brewing. That's now being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota. So stop by your favorite liquor store or the Black Stack Tap Room. Grab your favorite brew, or even better yet, try something new. You're not going to be disappointed. We will be back on Monday on the Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We would love to have you stop by and join us. It's just $8 a month, $2 a week. You will go to Target Field to watch the Brewers tonight. You'll spend twice as much on a beer than you would on an entire month of more Gleeman the Geek and Twins Talk than you probably can listen to.
Yeah, you'll get a new episode most Mondays and Wednesdays exclusively for Patreon subscribers. They're commercial free. We talk about the games right after they happen. We also have guests and mailbags. And in fact, we have a guest scheduled for this Wednesday. Hopefully that will be a guest we've been wanting to have on for a couple years, several years now. So I'm excited about that. If not, thank you guys for listening, and to the select few of you who hopped on the YouTube video train immediately. Thank you for watching. Thank you in advance for being somewhat kind in your feedback on this. We'll see. I mean, this is truly our maiden voyage on this. And so I think we will hopefully add a few more bells and whistles and smooth out some of the rough edges and stuff pretty quickly here as we get a little bit more experience. But we just decided, let's try it. Why not? Let's try to be.
We'll reward you for your patience by now finally, fading to black. Slowly to the Gleeman and Geek logo. Bye-bye.
Gleeman